फैजान की दे दी ये फैजान की
स्टार्ट कर दूं? हेलो
जी बिल्कुल स्टार्ट कर दें
कर दूं चलो So today we'll be discussing the anatomy of the external nose and the boundaries of the nasal cavity. Our objectives are to know the anatomy of the external nose. External nose is basically the structure that is seen on the face, and that is the prominence that is seen on the face. Okay, define the boundaries of the nasal cavity, blood vessels, and the nerve supply of the nose. So this is the objective that we are going to achieve today, inshallah. Basically, nose is the organ of respiration, and since it inspires air, it has those special sensory organs for olfaction, that is sense of smell, where it has the reception for the sense of smell. Along with that, it has a function of humidification of air, the filtration of the air that we breathe by the hair that are present within the nasal passages, the initial part of the respiratory passage. So the main functions are respiration, humidification of air, the reception of smell. These are all the functions of the nose or the respiratory passages. Okay? The superior 1/3 of the nose is concerned with olfaction, that is the sense of smell, whereas the 2/3 of the nose are the passages or the air conducting passages. The functions, you have a number of serous glands to make the air moist and mucous glands to trap the dust. So along with the hair follicles that are coarse hair present onto the skin, that is the distal part of nose, which have the ability to trap the foreign material or the foreign particles. The external nose would be divided into the root of the nose and the part which is the broader part, which are known as the nares, and this is the dorsum of the nose. So the externally visible part, this becomes the nose, has a free tip. This is the root, and the tip or the apex of the nose has two openings. These are the openings which are known as the external nares or the nostrils, which lead into the nasal cavity, and then from the nasal cavity, the posterior part of the nasal cavity has a connection to the nasopharynx, or it communicates with the nasopharynx. Each nostril is bounded laterally by the ala, medially by the nasal septum. Now this part, that is the external nare or the nostril, has a curved structure which covers it onto the lateral aspect, and in the midline you have another strip which is the nasal septum. So this curved part becomes the ala, and this is the nasal septum. So this structure, which is the external part of the nose, has bony elements and has cartilaginous elements. So the superior 1/3 of the nose can be divided or can be called as the bony part of the nose, whereas the inferior 2/3 are the cartilaginous elements. So it's a osteocartilaginous type of a structure that we see onto the external surface or onto the face. Superiorly, you have those smaller structures or bones which are known as the nasal bones. So you have a pair of nasal bones in the midline forming the root of the nose. Superior to that, you have the nasal part of the frontal bone. Lateral. So in the midline, you have the nasal bones on the two sides, and further medial to that, you have the frontal process of the maxilla. So this is the bony projection of the bony part of the external nose. Inferior to that, you will have certain plates of cartilage, that is lateral cartilages. You will have alar cartilages, a pair of lateral cartilages, one on each side, then a pair of alar cartilages. Then you have smaller cartilage or lesser alar cartilages. So basically the alar cartilage are a U-shaped structures which are divided into two parts. That is, you have a greater alar cartilage in the midline, and more medial to that you have the lesser alar cartilage. And there are some parts in between these two alar cartilages are smaller cartilages which are known as the sesamoid cartilages. Okay, then inferior to that you have a fibrofatty tissue, that is where you have the formation of ala of the nose. So superiorly you had the bony part, inferiorly you had the cartilaginous part, which is a hyaline type of cartilage, and then you have the among the cartilages, the name of the cartilages will be the lateral cartilages and the alar cartilages, and inferior to that you will have a fibrofatty tissue. Now one thing to be noted is that when you can if you pinch or you hold your nose, the superior part of the nose where you have those bony structure forming the root of the nose, that is the part where you have thin skin, whereas the part that is onto the inferior part of the nose where you have the fibrofatty tissue and the cartilages, at that area you have the skin is of thick type, and there are a large number of sebaceous glands onto the surface of the external nose. Now, moving from the external nose inwards, that is the structure, the main, the nose proper, that is called, extends from the external nares of the nostrils towards the posterior nares or the conchae. Sorry. Okay, so all the way from the external nares or nostrils to the posterior nares where you have the conchae. So this is the part which is known as the nose proper. Divided into it, the nasal cavity can be divided into the right and the left halves by the midline structure, which is known as the nasal septum. So each half can be called as the right and the left half of the nasal cavity, or the. Now each half, rather if we take without calling it as each half, this triangular or a pyramid shaped structure, if you follow this part, this is what is the nose proper. So as a whole you have a roof of this nasal cavity without dividing it into each half. Okay, half में भी यही है, it's same in the halves as well as, but you won't have, if either you do it in halves or as a whole cavity. So each cavity will be divided into two halves by a medial septum. Laterally, you will have two, on each side there is going to be a wall which is known as the lateral wall, which has a number of shelf-like projections, a roof and a floor. See, roof is the narrower part, whereas the floor is broader as compared to the roof. The roof is formed by the frontonasal part. So either you start from anterior to posterior or from posterior to anterior. In this case, they have mentioned it from posterior to anterior. I was going from anterior to posterior. That is, anteriorly you have the nasal bones, the frontal part of the nasal bone. Sorry, the nasal part of the frontal bone. I'm sorry for that. Okay, so you have the frontal, the nasal bone, the nasal part of the frontal bone. Posteriorly, you will have the cribriform plate of the ethmoid and the body of the sphenoid. So these structures, somewhat a curved or an arc-shaped structure, combination of structure that forms the roof of the the roof of the nose. The floor is broader as compared to the roof, and it is formed by the palatine process of the maxilla anteriorly. This is the palatine process of maxilla, and then posteriorly you have some parts of the palatine bones. So these structures, they form the floor of the nose. The medial wall, which is also known as the nasal septum, is osteocartilaginous. That is, some part of it is, superior part has a bony projection or bones being contributing to that, whereas inferiorly you have the cartilage. So formed, it's superiorly you have the the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. Then posterior to that you will have the posterior-inferiorly rather. Okay, so posteriorly you will have the ethmoid bone. Posterior-inferiorly you will have the boomerang bone, and wedged in between the two bones onto the anterior aspect you will have the septum, which is known as the septal cartilage. The lateral wall, there are a number of projections onto the lateral wall which increase the surface area of this lateral wall, and these projections again, the lateral wall and the medial wall, that is the walls of the nose where you have the bones present, the mucous membrane is adherent to the periosteum of the nose, and the mucous membrane is continuous throughout the structures which are in continuity with the nose. That is, for instance, when you come from the periosteum of the ethmoid bone all the way to the bony projections on the lateral wall, it continues over there, it continues into the nasolacrimal duct and posteriorly into the nasopharynx also. The bony projections onto the lateral wall which are rolled present in a rolled manner, that is, they are rolled over itself, or they have a shelf-like projection which are known as the conchae, and they are named as the superior, middle and the inferior concha. So these concha, they are somewhat scroll-like shelves which increase the surface area, and particularly in mammals who run at a faster pace, these conchae, they are more modified, or they are more curved over themselves. That is, they increase the surface area further. So in humans, you have three conchae, that is superior concha, the middle concha and the inferior concha. Between the concha there are depressions or spaces which are known as recesses or the meatus. For instance, this is the superior concha, this is the middle concha. In between the superior and the middle concha, you will have a middle meatus. The superior and the middle concha, they are part of the ethmoid bone, whereas the inferior concha is an independent bone and it's known as the inferior concha itself. The cavity below each concha is called a meatus and is named as superior, middle and inferior corresponding to the concha. So below each concha there is going to be a meatus. Okay. Posterior to the superior, posterior to this, this is the superior concha. Okay. Posterior to the superior concha, there is a recess which is known as the sphenoethmoidal recess. The middle meatus is continuous in front with the depression. Okay, wait a minute. Let me elaborate on this further. So this sphenoethmoidal recess, which is within the sphenoid bone, has the opening for the sphenoidal air sinus, and it is posterior superior to the superior meatus. The middle meatus, it is somewhat longer as compared to the superior meatus, and it is in a curved present in a curved fashion. Anterior to the middle meatus, you will have an area superior to the vestibule. I'll just tell you what vestibule is. I just missed it. Anterior to the middle meatus, there is a depression or an area which is known as the atrium. This atrium is superior to the vestibule. Now the vestibule is the part of the nose which is present onto the internal aspect of the nose, which is the continuation of a skin of the external nose. That is the area in between the area which continues as the mucous membrane. So the continuation of the skin onto the internal part of the nose where you have the vibrissae or the hair of the nose, that is known as the vestibule of the nose. And superior to the atrium, you will have a bulge which is known as the agar nasal. The conchae increases the surface area of the nasal cavity. The recesses and the meati receive the opening of the paranasal sinus and the nasolacrimal duct. Okay, before coming to the arterial supply, now if we focus onto the middle meatus, if you remove the superior concha, this is where you will have the middle meatus. The anterior part of the meatus, when you remove the middle meatus, there is a bulge which is known as the ethmoidal bulla, and inferior to that ethmoidal bulla, if you remove this part, there is going to be a bulge which is known as the ethmoidal bulla, and inferior to this bulla, there's a part which is known as the semilunar hiatus. This semilunar hiatus has the openings for the anteriorly, you will have the opening for the frontal sinus, and then you will have the opening in the middle for the maxillary sinus, and posteriorly you will have the opening for the middle ethmoidal sinuses, middle and the posterior ethmoidal sinuses. And then the inferior meatus, this is where you have the inferior meatus. It has the opening for the nasolacrimal duct onto the anterior aspect. So this is how you have the openings for the sinuses onto the meati. And again, the detail, this is the detail will be done when you do the paranasal sinuses. So superior concha, middle concha, and inferior concha. Then you had the sphenoethmoidal recess, which was posterior superior to the superior concha. And draining all these meati, you have this common area which is known as the common nasal meatus. So the superior, inferior, the superior, middle, and the inferior, they would open in a common passage. This passage is known as the common nasal meatus, and this common nasal meatus is between the lateral wall and the medial wall of each half of the nasal cavity. Now, the arterial supply to the nose is by two routes, that is internal carotid and external carotid artery. So you have the anterior ethmoidal, the posterior ethmoidal artery coming from the ophthalmic branch of the internal carotid artery, and they supply the superior halves of the nasal cavity. The sphenopalatine artery, which is a branch of the maxillary division of the external carotid, then you will have the greater palatine artery coming from the maxillary artery, along with septal branches coming from the facial artery. They will supply the inferior halves, the anterior and the inferior halves of the nasal cavity. The venous supply, that is the venous drainage. So you have an anastomosis between all these arteries, that is anastomosis between the branches of the internal and the external carotid artery, and the venous drainage is via the through the facial vein, via the angular veins and the lateral nasal veins. Okay, now coming to the nerve supply of the nose. The nerve supply of the nose can be divided as, if you draw an imaginary line, that is an imaginary line from the nasal spine, anterior nasal spine, towards the sphenoethmoidal recess. That is an angular line. It goes obliquely from anterior inferior aspect to posterior superior part. So you will have two halves of the nasal cavity. That is the anterior superior half of the nasal cavity, anterior superior half of the nasal cavity, and the posterior inferior halves of the nasal cavity. Okay, so all the way from the anterior nasal spine to the sphenoethmoidal recess. This is how you draw an imaginary line, such that you divide it into two triangular halves, that is anterior superior and posterior inferior. The anterior superior half receives, or the nerve supply to the anterior superior halves are by the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, whereas the posterior inferior area is supplied by the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. Okay, so this maxillary division will be will be by the nasopalatine, if we can label it over here. Then you have the posterior superior lateral nasal, okay, and then you have the inferior lateral nasal. So this is the posterior superior lateral nasal, and then you have the inferior lateral nasal branch, which are the branches of the greater palatine, supplying the lateral part of the nose, whereas the nasal septum is supplied by the nasopalatine branch of the maxillary division of the trigeminal. Anterior superior halves will be supplied by the ophthalmic branches coming from the anterior or the branches of the ophthalmic division, that is the anterior and the posterior ethmoidal, which are the branches of the nasociliary nerve. The external part of the nose, that is what's missed over here. The external part of the nose is supplied by the ophthalmic division, with the exception of the LA of the nose, which are supplied by the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. Okay, so that's the end of today's class. If you have any questions, we can have the questions now. The nasociliary nerve, as it is the branch of the anterior, it gives the anterior and the posterior ethmoidal branches, and it is the branch from the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal. So the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal is going to supply the anterior superior part of the nasal cavity. Okay, what else can you say regarding agar nasal? Okay, agar nasal and okay. Okay, now regarding the arterial supply, there's a question regarding the arterial supply. So at the septum of the nose, at the anterior aspect of the septum of the nose, this is the area where you have the branches coming from the internal carotid and the external carotid anastomosing. That is the anterior and the posterior ethmoidal arteries and the greater palatine arteries and the septal branch of the superior labial. So that's a branch from the facial artery. They anastomose at the septum, and that is the area where due to trauma or due to excessive pinching, that is, certain people have a habit of excessive pinching of their nose or picking up at the nose. So that is the area where the skin is thin, the vasculature is rich, and you just have the septum, so you do not have much of other tissue elements. Therefore, that area is prone to bleed, and that in younger children, due to excessive heat, or even in people with high blood pressure, like who have sudden increase in blood pressure, that is the area where bleeding might occur, and that is known as epistaxis. Okay. Okay, I have one question regarding the atrium of the lateral wall of the nose. Okay. We had done that there are scroll-like raised parts onto the lateral wall of the nose, which are known as concha. Beneath the concha, you have the depressions, which are known as the meati. Now you had the superior concha, and you had the middle concha and the inferior concha. एक और diagram नीचे डालते हैं. ठीक? Beneath the concha, you had those meatus. So the anterior aspect of the middle meatus, you have a slight depression. This depression is known as the atrium. And superior to this atrium, there is an elevation or a raised margin, which is known as the agar nasal. This atrium lies in between, or where you have anterior aspect of the middle meatus and the vestibule. Again, the vestibule of the nose is the skin of the nose, which is slightly turned inwards, where you have the hair follicles of the nose. That is the vestibule. So that is how you have the atrium and the agar nasal. In epistaxis, it's the anastomosis which gets damaged. So it can be any artery, or it's rather the anastomosis where it gets weakened or traumatized. The area of the nasal septum, where you have the anastomosis in between these arteries, is known as the Little's area or the Kieselbeck's area also. Okay, thank you very much. That's the end for the queries that we have, and it's the end of the session so far. Thank you. Any other question? Okay. Beta sphenoethmoidal recess. It's a meatus, ठीक है? Superior, middle, and inferior concha से related, we had called them meatus. The sphenoethmoidal, that opening or the cavity which is related to the sphenoidal sinus is known as the sphenoethmoidal recess. Okay, the common meatus. What is bulla? Bulla, एक second, let me go to the slide share if I can find it again. Okay, I have a few diagrams. Let me do it. I had saved a few of them. Okay, the question I got was that what is ethmoidal bulla and और क्या था? And where does the nasolacrimal duct open? Okay. When you expose the middle meatus, there is an elevation present or formed due to the middle ethmoidal air cells. Okay? Those are known as the ethmoidal bulla. That is a raised part is known as the ethmoidal bulla. And inferior to the ethmoidal bulla, there is a semilunar or a crescentic area which is known as the semilunar hiatus. यहाँ पे होगा, when you remove this part, you will see the ethmoidal bulla. The nasolacrimal duct, it opens into the anterior inferior aspect of the inferior meatus. कॉमन नेजल meatus, ठीक है? कॉमन meatus आएगा आपके पास. Let me see if I have that diagram. No, I don't have it over here. Okay, before I end it, let me give you again view of क्या है common nasal meatus, ठीक है? Between the now this is the cut section in the coronal plane. This is the nasal septum, that is the midline structure which divides the nasal cavity into the right and the left halves. ठीक है, यहाँ तक clear है? Onto the each aspect you will have the lateral walls. The lateral walls are the corrugated walls or the walls which have a number of folds and depressions. These are known as the concha and the meati. Okay? The second thing, now in between the opening or the area in between these two walls, that is besides the superior concha and the superior meatus, the middle and the inferior meatus, you have another hollow space between the septum, that is the middle wall, and the lateral wall, and this is known as the common nasal meatus. ठीक है भाई, so thank you very much once again. We are ending this class over here. Thanks a lot.
Hello. हेलो
हेलो,
जी।
हो गई क्लास?
ठीक है, आपने कंप्लीट कर लिया?
जी मैंने कर दिया कंप्लीट।
मैं एंड कर दूं?
हाँ जी, एंड कर दीजिए। मैं लीव कर दूं मीटिंग?
बिल्कुल कर दें।
चलें जी, थैंक यू ओके।